Boom, boom. Hello, welcome everybody to episode 5. Yes, 5 of the Devtober devlogs for, well, I keep saying, I suppose, as yet untitled. The game is now titled. Firstly, the other day on the live stream, we made a sort of remix of the Dankenstein logo as a kind of, you know, like splash screen or whatever, like to just introduce the game. And then, there we go. The game is called Food Fight. It has a name, and we made this high-res version of the main character, the baby. And you can see we've updated our menus quite a lot. We have a pause menu now that looks much more pretty. We also have our game over screen here. Last but I suppose not least, we also have the toy box. And this one took quite a bit of work. Let me show you this full screen actually. So we added a little bit to this. Firstly, just making the text a bit smaller. But we added 3 new buttons to buy ammo by the 100 instead of just by 10s. And just kind of made it all a bit clearer. With the smaller text, we had more room to actually write the word upgrade instead of just a plus sign, and yeah, like just showing how many of each bit of ammo you get. So yeah, so that was one of the main things we've been working on since the last devlog, is just making the thing look really pretty, you know. And we even made a cosmetic change to the main world as well. You'll notice I've ever so slightly, in fact probably cutting to some footage of gameplay is the best way to show this. I've changed the texture of the backdrop to be a lot brighter, but less noisy. And I think that kind of fits with the colours we're using in our menus as well better. And yeah, I just prefer that look, I think. So all of those cosmetic changes were mostly just pixel art, and there was a live stream we did the other day, you can see. But one thing I do want to talk about and show off is the theme stuff here. Now you notice the theme on the toy box GUI is empty. That's because this one's a bit unique, because actually this button at the bottom, the next wave button, if we look at its theme, it has a particular theme with font in size 8, whereas then if you look at everything else in the other containers, which I guess, where did I put it? I put it in the center container. Yeah, look, the center container has a different theme with font of size 5. It was all pretty easy to do. You just have to create these different styles for each button, for each type of button. Yeah, you just sort of tweak these values until it looks nice. But there's a certain workflow that took me a while to get my head around, and then I ended up realizing that the best thing to do is to make a folder for all of my theme files. So anyway, so that just took a little bit of playing around, but it's pretty intuitive once you play around with it long enough, you know. You work out what's going on there. So yeah, so that's one thing. Then the other thing we've been working on is balancing the gameplay itself, and most of this happened in scripting. And I'll just show you one example of one of the things we did. It was actually a bug, I suppose. One of the things that a few playtesters reported was instances where the knockback on the enemies from the rattle actually ends up hitting them towards you. So we'll jump back into paint here, but if you recall, we spoke about this, I think in the first devlog actually. But like, let's say, okay, the player is like here, right? This is the player. Let's just fill them in. And then the rattle can be this yellow thing. If it was one of those P enemies, let's say the P is here and it gets hit by the rattle, you'd obviously want the knockback going this way. And I think that made sense, really. It certainly feels more dynamic than just, you know, hitting them on the side here and then just going that way simply because the player is pointing that way. Yeah, that just seemed like strange to me. It seemed like more dynamic for the two things to collide and for the knockback to be in the direction that sort of made sense, right? However, you sometimes get situations with once we added the cooldown to the rattle, that changed things. You know, it was possible then for enemies to end up in places like this, and then the cooldown on the rattle finishes, and so then the enemy is knocked back towards the player, and that felt incredibly unfair. So we needed to work out a way of fixing this. I didn't want to just say, okay, screw it, just use the same knockback as all the other weapons and make them always go directly away from the player, because I thought we'd lose the dynamic stuff that we worked so hard on. So I wanted best of both worlds. I wanted to basically draw a line around here that would say, you know, if the enemy is the player side of that line, then just knock them directly away. However, if they are on the other side of the line, continue with the dynamic stuff. So in here, when the hurt box area is entered, if, do you remember we set this up before, if the name is rattle hitbox, do all this stuff, otherwise then being hit by a bullet, and then it's really simple. But so we had to add to this, and the trick was this line here, which I actually shout outs to my cousin, who had to help me get my head around what we needed to do with this one. But basically, we work out the angle from the rattle to the player, we work out the angle of the knockback as is proposed with the old system, with the dynamic system, and then what we do is we work out what the distance is between these two angles. Because a circle loops around 0 to 360 back to 0, I was thinking about it like, well, there's an acceptable range where the knockback can be allowed, and if it's within that range it goes on the dynamic route. If it's outside of that range, then it must be towards the player and we have to do something else. But thinking of it as a range was the wrong approach, because the range could straddle the transition from 360 degrees back to 0, and then your range doesn't really work. You can't say something that's higher than 350 but lower than 10. Those numbers don't exist, even though that would be the range we'd be looking at. You know, you can't be both higher than 300 and lower than 10, for example. So the way we kind of got around this was a little trick where we basically just said, because it's a circle, there must be two different distances between the angles. There's the long way around the circle and the short way around the circle, and we always want to look at that short way round the circle. The player's angle minus the knockback angle modulo 360, or the knockback angle minus the player angle modulo 360. So that's saying either we go around this way or we go around that way, and then we just check which one the lowest value is, and that shows us the short way around the circle. And then we just say, well, is that distance greater than 90 degrees? Because if the shortest one is greater than 90 degrees away, then we know it's in the other half of the circle. But if the shortest distance between the player angle and the knockback angle is less than 90 degrees, then it must be in the same half of the circle, the same 180. I hope that makes sense. It took me ages to get my head around this, so it's probably relatively simple actually as far as like this kind of stuff goes, but this was probably the big cheese. And yeah, so the game is in a pretty feature complete state now. I would say we're kind of happy with everything in there. I'm not going to be adding any more features now, but I've made a new build and sent it back to the playtesters to just see if there's any bugs they can find in the next couple of days. So we'll finish off with some gameplay footage just for you to have a look at and see how the game is running now. And we've got the dynamic music implemented, so you might hear that as we go between menus and waves. You'll hear the music changing as well. But I also just wanted to say, like, this Devtober thing has been amazing. So shout outs to the organisers, mad respect for that. And for everybody on that Devtober Discord, it's been really encouraging. You know, it's the first game I've ever made, and the little community that I found with this Devtober gang has been phenomenal. So shout outs to you all, it's awesome. Thanks so much, you know, for letting me be a part of it. This imposter game maker that I am. And I've enjoyed the process so much that I've decided, and I really enjoyed the fact that it was a month. I think a month was a really good amount of time. I could make something that I'm quite proud of, and I feel is relatively polished. But it's a short enough amount of time as well that it's kept me focused on just getting it completed and ensuring like scope creep doesn't sink its teeth into me too much. So it's been manageable amount of time, I think, as well as being, enough time that it's not too stressful. So I want to do it again, and I've actually thought of a concept here. So although this is the last devlog for this game, for Food Fight, this series of devlogs is going to continue, because the plan I'm going to embark on now is to make one game every month for a year. So we're going to make 12 games between now and the end of September 23. So I need to get going on my November game. I think I'm going to do a 2D platformer. I don't think I'm quite ready to jump into 3D yet. But I think instead of top down, let's go for side scroller thing. Let's go for platformer. I can play around with maybe getting some nice parallax art done. And I kind of want to try boss fights for this platformer, rather than just having lots of little enemies like we did in this game. I'm gonna do a platformer with a focus on combat. And so I think we want bigger enemies to fight. Rather than just little dudes, we're going to have bosses to fight. So it's enemies that have more complicated AI, a few different attack patterns, and a player that has more maneuverability and more different ways to attack as well. I think could be fun. So that's my plan for November, and so stay tuned for more. And thanks so much for watching and supporting this new series and supporting my endeavours. In the next couple of days I will release a video with a trailer for the game and just to announce that it's released, and I think it's going to be released for free. For now, I was thinking maybe we release all the games for free for all you guys that are following this now, and after the 12 are all finished in a year's time, we then start selling them. So get your free access to this game while the getting's good. I'm going to release it on the 1st of November, and I really want to see what high scores you guys can get, because I think the game is quite difficult. At the moment my high score is wave 17, so that's the challenge. Thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and get yourself a copy of Food Fight on the 1st of November when I release it. And be excellent to each other. Peace.